apologise to any members of the public who'd attempted to look at the agenda for this meeting prior to about 1 o'clock today due to a technical issue that hadn't been properly published on the council website, but the fact that the meeting was happening was on the website, but that agenda has been there for the last 3 hours or so. So let's just move on. I don't have any apologies today. I was expecting Councillor Driver, but he hasn't yet joined us, but hopefully he will be able to. I've had no public questions or petitions. Do any members have any declarations of interest that they need to tell us about on today's agenda? No, thank you. Minutes, item 4, I need to approve the accuracy of the minutes from our meeting on the 15th of July. Can I get, are people happy that those are formally approved? If you can nod, put your hands up, otherwise indicate. Yep, great, thank you very much. So we're now on to item 5, which is the main reason we're here today. So this is a continuation of our piece of work on air pollution from wood burning. The report is on page 27 of the agenda pack today, and the minutes, which are on page 5, will show the information we received at our last meeting. I'm very grateful to 3 external people who are able to join us today. We've got James Verlack, who is the technical manager for the Stove Industry Alliance, and also here in an observer capacity is Andy Hill, who is the chair-elect of that body, and also very grateful that Matthew White is able to join us. Mr. White was, a letter from Mr. White to the council prompted this particular piece of scrutiny, so we're very grateful that he's been able to join us and to give us his input. But without any further ado, what I'd like to do, we'll have effectively take this in 3 sections. We'll hear from the SIA, anything that Mr. Black wants to say. We'll then have a series of questions for the SIA. We'll then go through the same process with Mr. White. That's part 2, and then part 3 will be where, as a committee, we come up with any potential recommendations. So, without any further ado, James Verlack, could I invite you to talk a bit about the SAA, your view on wood burning stoves, and then I'll be inviting members from this committee to ask questions. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to contribute today. The SIA is a trade association for the solid fuel fireplace industry and constitutes everything from fuel producers, appliance manufacturers, component manufacturers, and retailers. And was set up some 12 years ago to represent that industry and its interest to the government. One of the key factors is that the attribution of particulate matter emissions, as reported on the DEFRA website, was correctly pointed out by the correspondent, states erroneously, in our opinion, the contribution from indoor domestic wood burning. We commissioned a piece of paper. We've been in dialogue with DEFRA for the last 5 years, to my knowledge, about this subject. And in fact, they recognise that there are some errors in that number and the calculations, so including in their impact assessment on the quantification of emissions in December 2019. The HETAS, which is another industry body, a certification body for installers and products, with support from the SI, commissioned an independent academic review of existing scientific research and literature and methodologies that focused on this. And that review by Doctors Mitchell, Cottam, Phillips and Dooley, which is peer reviewed by professors of University of Leeds, came up with some quite interesting conclusions. Namely, that the emissions that are reported by DEFRA in the emission statistic for domestic indoor wood burning actually are based on a false estimation of wood use based on a Bayes 2017 survey, which estimated wood burn on indoor settings at 6 million tonnes. The SIA evaluation, based on a survey of 5 times as many users, and these were heavy wood users, came out with a figure of 1.87 million tonnes, and the Kantar report that was published earlier this year came out with a slightly lower figure for indoor wood burn at 1.73 million tonnes. Now, the way that the emissions are actually calculated is that you actually times the amount of wood burn by an emissions factor. So there we already think that there's a huge error. And secondly, increasing numbers of stoves are actually eco-design stoves, which actually produce emissions at 3 times lower than the emissions factors used. So that's called the bottom-up approach to calculation. There's a top-down approach, which also uses to verify those numbers, which also is open to huge errors, according to the DEFRA report, due to old equipment, measuring non-specific biogenic traces. So this equipment measures a chemical called levoglukosane, which comes from any combustion or cooking process of any biological thing. So bakery emissions, cigarettes, bonfires, so on and so forth. The other thing that Doctors Mitchell and Cottam et al. Stated was that biomass burning in agriculture and land management should be further researched, because this is potentially a huge contributor. And it's also noted that 50% of particulate matter concentrations are transboundary, and that put that in context, in 2019, an estimated 600,000 hectares of forest were lost to wildfires in Europe. We currently believe that if you took all of the existing literature, you'd be talking about something like 50% of the contribution that's currently been assigned to indoor burning actually comes from outdoor burning of biomass in one form or another. With regard to the comments about the amounts relative to road traffic, it wouldn't be appropriate for us to comment on other sectors other than to say that wood burning stoves emit any emissions 5-6 meters plus above the place where people stood, and also produce very little NOx. It should be noted that in a modern eco-design clear sky stove, that the vastly improved combustion release a higher proportion of relatively harmless inorganic salts also. We agree and have always supported that local authorities should do all that they can to reduce emissions from all sources. It's also important to maintain an eye on low carbon heating, energy security and fuel poverty, and not least importantly, consumer choice. As an industry, following consultations with DEFRA a few years ago, we pioneered a new certification scheme called Clear Skies Mark. This Clear Skies Mark aids consumers, installers, sweeps, enforcement officers and local authorities, policy setters, by providing the only place where products that comply with both the DEFRA exemption and the forthcoming eco-design regulations can be easily identified. But importantly, and at the request of DEFRA, this scheme actually goes beyond the requirements of eco-design and grades products into the better performing products. So Clear Skies Level 2 would be eco-design compliant. So that's already a vast tightening on the previous old regulations for wood burning stoves. Level 3 will also include, will be eco-design compliant and DEFRA exempt. Then level 4 will show the same as level 3, but with a 15% improvement across 5 metrics. So efficiency, particulate matter, carbon monoxide, organic matter, and nitrogen oxides. And each subsequent level is a 15% improvement on the previous one. So this allows consumers to pick the right process, and also with a view to increased authority for local authorities with forthcoming environment bill, for local authorities to tighten up air quality quite stringently by saying that there are levels there to look at. It should also be at that point, we should state the Clear Skies Mark Limited is an independent organisation with its own governance body, and the certification is actually administered by an independent certification body. With regard around the dangers of air pollution, particularly from wood burning, and this puts putting the general public at health, the only thing I would say is it's really important not to take out little pieces of information. And I noticed in the link that was provided in the letter that the researchers also state that it doesn't imply a direct cause-effect relationship between air pollution and COVID, although it's possible. Instead, it refers to relationships between the two. I think we all agree that reducing emissions from all sources is a priority for society, but that must also be held against the backdrop that climate change is a truly frightening challenge that all societies across the globe are facing, and wood burning is the original low carbon and sustainable form of heating. The Kantar report provided a lot of useful information, both surprising in terms of the amount of wood being burnt outside. That's the first time we'd seen that quantified. And it also says that there's been a significant shift from open fires to wood burning stoves. Now, work done by Kiwa showed that a modern eco-design compliant or Clear Skies level 4 or 5 appliance will emit 90% less particulate matter than an open fire, and up to 80% less particulate matter than a 10-year-old stove. The engineering and the innovation in the industry over the last 10 years has been quite dramatic, and you actually have finely toleranced, precision engineered, leak-tight products burning the right fuel when installed properly, maintained properly, provide very clean, low-carbon heat. It should also be noted that a modern eco-design stove might have an efficiency as high as 85%. So you're actually probably getting 3 to 4 times as much heat out for the same amount of wood burn also. And also, contrary to some press reports, people burning wood primarily do so for heat. In the 10,620 user survey that the SIA completed 2 years ago, 96.5% of the respondents said they used that for heat. I'm not saying that all of that heat would displace fossil fuel use, but an awful lot of it will. And if you compare that to, according to the UK government greenhouse gas conversion factors, the carbon dioxide equivalent of a wood log, so that's its propensity to contribute towards global warming and climate change, is 1/10 or more of natural gas, electric, fuel oil, etc. Correctly, I think higher income homes are more likely purchasers of new eco-design products, but the DEFRA Kantar report also stated that 13.5% of indoor burners reported some difficulty in meeting energy bills. And there's still a considerable proportion of society that does have fuel poverty issues in the UK. Regarding the increased danger to workers in pubs, recent research shows that any small contribution that comes from a wood burning stove during refueling or de-ashing does not result in levels of exposure that exceed the WHO 24-hour exposure limits. There's also growing evidence that other sources of particulate matter indoors, such as cooking, frying and roasting particularly, candles, aerosols, etc., produce higher levels of particulate matter for longer. With this literature review that was commissioned, has found no scientific evidence of which we are aware that supports the assertion that there are adverse health impacts from indoor air pollution caused by a modern closed appliance. So by replacing the open fire with the closed stove, if correctly installed and operated correctly, could well improve air quality. Many responsible users do indeed buy seasoned wood, kiln-dried wood in bulk, and also non-seasoned wood in bulk to season themselves. I consider myself one of those. The SIA supports the Ready to Burn scheme operated by Woodsure and have been fully supportive of the government's educational messages of burning the right fuel on the right properly maintained appliances. An interesting output from the Kantar report was that where users have replaced old open fires or old wood burning stoves with new eco-design compliant ones, their operational practice is far better. They have a stronger connection to burning the right fuel on the appliance to get the right effect. The SI have long supported smoke control areas and moved to promote eco-design ready stove schemes 4 years ago with the creation of the eco-design ready scheme. We understand the Environment Bill will further empower local authorities and simplify enforcement by making it a civil offence to burn and create nuisance rather than a criminal one. The SIA, in all its submissions to government, has always been supportive of that stance. As I mentioned earlier, we've also created pioneered this Clear Skies scheme, which allows people to choose the least polluting stoves and actually the cleanest and most efficient ones. And finally, I'd just like to tie off on saying that burning wood domestically on a Clear Skies certified stove produces controllable, low carbon heat in the space which requires heating, with efficiencies in the mid 80%, with a carbon dioxide emissions factor, a tenth of electric local space heaters or gas or oil local space heaters. We fully support sustainable wood management. We have members who are actively engaged in their own schemes of that. Sustainable wood management is a process which generates domestic wood fuel. And just a quote from the International Energy Agency's Bioenergy Technology Group report, it says, energy from woody biomass can contribute to climate change mitigation. As a renewable fuel, it should be used efficiently, and when harvested from forests, it must come from sustainably managed forests where carbon stocks are maintained or enhanced on a regional or national basis. Forest bioenergy can support rapid transformation of the energy sector, and bioenergy linked with carbon capture and storage is one of the options that can deliver negative emissions. We strongly believe that wood burning stoves on a modern eco-design compliant stove can improve local air quality, can improve energy usage and energy efficiency, alleviate fuel poverty, and provides a low carbon heat source that people can be proud of. And thank you. I'm open to questions.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I'm going to ask a question first, and while I'm doing that, I'm going to ask any members to indicate to me so that I can call them for subsequent questions. It would be helpful if you could use the hand raising facility in Zoom for that. But no, my question is, thanks very much for the presentation. You talked about sort of well-maintained stoves and the newer stoves being more efficient and producing less pollutants. I have to have my car annually MOT'd, and one of the things as part of the MOT is that it's checked for that it's emitting within tolerance. Although not within the remit clearly of this committee, but would it be practical to insist that people have an annual servicing of their wood burning stove, and that was legally mandated in order to ensure that only the efficient ones were still in circulation? Thank you.
You're absolutely right, and that's something that we have always supported, the idea of a twice or at least once a year full chimney sweep. We think that appliances should be maintained. Most sweeps will do that informally when they review the appliance. They'll see if there's anything that's damaged, blocked. They will clean it out completely. There's very little moving parts on an appliance. They will check because a wood burning stove operates under negative draft, so the chimney effectively is sucking things out. So with modern stoves, they'll check the seal things, but we would support a formal legal instruction for annual maintenance of both the appliance and the flue system.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Galvin, please.
Thank you, Mr. Verlack. Can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Yeah, great.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for your information, and welcome to Norwich. Although you're not in Norwich. Where are you actually?
I'm actually in Painswick in the Cotswolds.
Oh, okay. Oh, well, welcome to Norwich. We've already had a presentation. You've probably seen from a UEA academic in the effects of particulate matter on health. And she specifically, we checked with her, and she specifically referenced that, and we already knew this, how that PMs are extremely harmful to health. And the DEFRA report, the Clean Air Strategy from 2019, which I think you were referring to, said that the largest source of particulate matter in homes is from solid fuel burning, basically, like stoves, and so 38%, and industrial sources of particulate matter are 16%, and road transport is 12. Are you saying you dispute that that it's not that high?
Yes,
that's DEFRA.
yeah.
So,
we have. In fact,
are you going to sue them about that as an association, or
no,
it's very harmful to your businesses?
It is. It's not ideal. We're not asking for any favours, never have done. We're looking for a fair crack of the whip. When you look at the complexity of putting together a national atmospheric emissions inventory, it is not inconsiderable, and the world has been trying to do it right for the last 30 or 40 years, to the best of my knowledge. You have to make assumptions at certain points, and some of the assumptions that have been made we don't think are any longer applicable to our industry. So for the reasons I explained, that figure of 38% about the particulate matter emissions that are emitted from chimneys from indoor wood burning is we believe, incorrect, because it was based on taking an emissions factor, so how many grams per ton or kilograms per ton of wood burnt go out into the atmosphere, and that was based on an estimate of wood use that's 300% of the reality that is burnt in people's fireplaces. Now, in 2019, the DEFRA impact assessment on those quantums actually acknowledged that there was huge uncertainty in those. As a result of which, DEFRA subsequently, and with the results of some of the input we gave to them, said, well, we need to look at this a little bit more closely. We're going to focus on legislating on getting rid of the more polluting fuels, on educating the consumer. And at the same time, we're going to look at research into how much is actually burnt, and the Kantar report, the figures they came out of that actually came out at a little lower than the SIA's estimates at 1.73 million tonnes compared to the 1.87 that we'd suggested. It was the figure. It's the same number statistically, I think, but certainly not 6 million tonnes. They've also said, okay, modern eco-design stove, old stove, wet wood, green wood, dry wood, all will give you a different amount of pollution or a different amount of emission of particulate matter for each fuel and each different type of appliance. And they've just let a very significant contract to some independent research organisations and consultancies to come up with correct figures for that. But yes, we are asserting that it's wrong and have done openly to DEFRA repeatedly, and will continue to do so. And we have a very good relationship with the air quality team in DEFRA. And any research that we come across, we share with them openly.
Thank you. Councillor Gowan, you've got a...
Is that okay to just ask one follow-up to that?
Yeah.
Really? So I wouldn't really expect you to be saying anything else as the industry association, but you wouldn't dispute that PM is extremely harmful to health, would you? Particulate matter? No.
And everything we can do to keep levels as low as we can without dramatically altering society, I think is to be encouraged. A proportionate response to it.
Thank you. Councillor Driver, I think yours was the next hand that I saw.
Thank you, Councillor. And sorry I was a bit late. I was trying to get on the council website. James, I missed the first briefing, but I did read the papers on this. All these wood burners which are coming out now, the newer versions, how many have we actually got in properties percentage-wise which are up to standard, and how many are in houses at the moment which are not up to standard? And do you think the services is there to keep them safe every year? I mean, if you got clean your chimney twice a year, I mean, it's hard enough to get one chimney sweep once a year, that to book one in for 2 times a year, and also the maintenance of the the wood burner and stuff to keep that up to date and keeping it safe. How long has this country got the technology and the ways to do it at the moment, or are we just way behind? And we would have to really put things into this. I mean, because if you put one in my house today, you're telling me I've got to change in 10 years' time, and all the expense for those 10 years seem a lot of bother.
Yeah, I think there's some very interesting questions in there, and I'll try to answer them as fully and as openly as I can. In terms of the number of fireplaces that are used, and by fireplaces I mean open and stoves that are used to burn wood, we believe there's 1.919 million stoves that are used. About 20% of those have the latest eco-design stoves fitted. And that's something that's been, since these are based on Stove Industry Alliance figures. We think 48% are probably old stoves, and about 32% of them are still used open fireplaces. Do we have the sufficient resource to maintain those annually? There are something like 2,000 registered chimney sweeps nationally. They've 4 or 5 different trade associations which have formed a federation of trade associations. Each of the sub ones all specialise in something different. They tell me there is sufficient resource in the country to do a legally obliged sweep and maintenance service every year. They're actually going further than that, in that they're looking at developing a new national occupational standard for chimney engineers to take it to sort of degree level, as well as the more vocational MVQs 2s which exist at present. So in answer to that, yes, I do think so. In terms of the future proofing, as I mentioned, to go from an open fire to a modern clear skies stove or eco-design compliant stove, you're looking at a potential 90% plus reduction in emissions, with a 3 to 4 times increase in useful heat out for the same amount of wood. It's controllable, so you can turn it down, turn it back up to monitor temperature. Where there's central heating, depending on where the thermostat is placed, if you're using your wood-burning stove to provide heat, it will displace at least some of that fossil fuel or electric heat consumption. So with the efficiency, you're getting to a point where at 85 to 90% efficiency, you're getting to the maximum you're going to get there. The challenge for our industry is to go from where we were 5 years ago, where there were no real requirements for every stove, other than stoves that were to be used in smoke control areas, to a place where actually we emit 0. And we're making great progress on that. As I say, there's been an 80% improvement from a stove 10 years ago to a modern eco-design stove. And there's further work going on by the manufacturers to look at how do we take even more out in the coming years. How do we remove even more of that particulate matter emission?
Council Driver, you've got a follow-up?
Yeah, thanks, James. That's really, really good. So are you recommending that people change their heaters or fires every 10 years then? I mean,
no, I don't.
Or are we talking about these things will become a lot cheaper? I mean, or...
I don't think you'd need to change them every 10 years. I think there will be undoubtedly some retrofit technology to remove the last few bits of particulate matter, in the same way that you can do other technologies with various filters. But that's fairly new. If I go back 6-7 years ago, compliance involved around designing a product which met a minimum standard. So that was a minimum standard for carbon dioxide emissions, because that was the biggest concern at that time from burning solid fuels, and still is. Hopefully a lot mitigated now by having to install carbon monoxide monitors. Having a certain amount of efficiency and an aesthetic appeal. over the last 7 years, with the advent of eco-design and with the engagement that the SIA's had with government, we fed back into our manufacturing members and said, we need to be thinking about what we're doing in post eco-design, because in 5 years' time, I mean, it was a 7-year period to get to eco-design, and our members started a long time ago. So the appliances are getting cleaner, and they're actually, the manufacturers are now looking beyond eco-design requirements, which were already a significant tightening of what was there before. Manufacturers now, with the clear skies, are getting quite competitive. And we've had one manufacturer who withdrew some products because he said, I'm going to redesign them so they get the better things. And that's what, hopefully, at the end of this, you'll have the impression that the wood-burning stove industry is trying its best to go beyond the legal requirements that are applicable at the moment. I don't think you'll need to change your appliance every 10 years. They're most of them are well engineered. They should be something you can be proud of for a long time. And as I say, once it's a clear skies level, it should be very clean.
Thank you for that. Any other councillors with questions? Councillor Carlo, did I see your hand there?
Yep. Thank you, James, Chair, and thank you, James,
Thank you.
for the presentation. I just wanted to ask, please, how much does what's the cost of a state-of-the-art wood burner, please? I'm thinking in terms of people in fuel poverty. How much would they have to pay? Okay,
I think that the rate, like all consumer products, the range is quite significant. In the figures that we've put together for you, the average price of an eco-design stove we think is somewhere of the order of £1,000 to £1,100. The average price of an install, if there's an existing flue, would probably be of the order of £1,000. And average maintenance check sweep is £65, £75, depending on where you are in the country. So it's not a cheap item, which is one of the benefits for it, is that it does last a long time. If I was a local authority and was looking to make a positive impact immediately, I'd be seeking to support replacement of open fires with an eco-design stove, because you get a 90% reduction and an increase in heat, useful heat, for the same amount of wood that you put in.
Okay, thank you. I've got a further question, James. Yes, listening to your presentation, I'm reminded a bit of the bus industry in some way. So the argument of some bus companies is that if you have diesel buses to Euro 6 standard, you would reduce pollution by about 90%. But ideally, you'd want to go to electric buses using renewable energy sources, because you both cut pollution and also carbon. So the case that you're making for stone sounds very much akin to the diesel bus industry in some ways.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of similarities between that aspect of the transport technology, if we call it. I think whether you choose electricity or hydrogen as the ultimate zero carbon energy vector, I would argue that you need both. I spent a lot of my last 20 years working in that space. The issue you have is that you have to keep making gradual improvements to reduce your carbon emissions. To create a fully electric world, there's a huge investment, not just in the generation technology, but also in terms of how we store energy and also how we actually deliver that energy. So putting multiple fast charge units onto an existing substation grid will create problems. So it's all about, I think, where you design a new housing estate, for example, or new housing development, you can actually design for the right technology that's available now today. So, for example, heat pumps. You design the houses where you've got an existing, where you can put in the right sized radiators, the right sized pipe work. You can design it for the right kind of thermal insulation performance, and you put a heat pump on it. It's a great solution. As an industry, we would argue, and we have experience of this, that you still require a secondary heat source for those days where the temperature changes very quickly or goes very cold, because a heat pump's a steady state performance. But that's just something that we would advise. So you can start to make these gradual steps, but when you're talking about the 21 million homes across the whole of the country, I don't know, I'm not a transport expert, but I don't know how many buses there are. To just go from one to the other overnight is quite a dramatic turn. And that's why the government's talking over the next 20 to 30 years to make those infrastructure investments. And it's about enabling the, by zone or by innovation, or allowing market forces maybe in some cases, or where they need to make national infrastructure investments to enable that ideal zero carbon future to happen. Does a wood burning stove have a future in the net carbon zero world? I believe it will have. I think it provides a lot of energy security. I think as we push the electricity grid and the gas grids to ever greater stress in the interest of keeping to net zero, I think having the security of off-grid heating will become increasingly attractive. But in the first phase of moving towards a net zero world, burning wood that's produced sustainably is a low carbon heating option.
I'm going to ask a quick follow-up to that before inviting other members. And apologies for not knowing the exact specifics of your industry, but do your members deal exclusively in stoves that actually burn things, or do you do sort of fake ones as well that are electric powered? Have you got a sort of a foot in both camps, so to speak?
Most of our manufacturing members would have a range of products, not all of them, but certainly some of them. They would have electric heaters. And bear in mind that still electric heaters are still, a lot of the electricity in there is still produced by burning coal and gas at national grid level. So the carbon intensity of burning wood on a room heater is still a tenth of what it is to have an electric heater or a gas heater. So to answer, most of them will have electric heating, gas heating. Very few in this country will have local space heaters running on oil. Some of them will have some bioethanol products. So in answer to your question, they will have several. Several of them, I'm thinking, actually have been party and have won grants from the Haifa Heat project to actually develop hydrogen products for that zero carbon future that we all aspire to.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Councillor Manning, you're next, please.
Hi, thanks, James, and thanks, James Verlaque, as well for your presentation. I hope you can hear me okay.
And thank you.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I just had a couple of quick questions, and apologies if I missed anything in your presentation. It was quite long and but very informative, and I was making.
I apologise.
No, that's right. No, don't apologise. I just had I possibly showing my ignorance here of wood burners. I've been in homes which have wood burning stoves, and they are really nice to sit around. I fully agree with that, especially in winter. And they're always an attractive feature of pubs and restaurants that have them as well. But are they not actually a slightly ineffective way of heating a house? And I'm thinking of this from a sort of a fuel poverty perspective. I've not been, I think, in a home or a commercial venue yet where I've felt the benefit of the stove outside of the room it's in. So I just really wondered about that. Again, I could be showing ignorance here, and I know James, Councillor Wright, now just touched on other forms of burner, which perhaps can be linked to a heating system for residential or commercial premises. So I just really wondered what your thoughts might be on that line of thinking, whether it's just wrong or there's something in it. And also I'm just interested really from your industry perspective of what has been recent experience of sales of wood burning stoves in the UK, and how do you see sales going in the future? What are sort of current trends in terms of manufacture or product, or even the fuel itself? How do you see your industry faring, particularly in a sort of a post-COVID environment where maybe COVID's had absolutely no effect at all? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll try. If I miss something, please pick me up on it. The first question is it an effective way of heating a home? A dry wood burning stove is designed to heat the room in which it's installed. So in European parlance, they call them local space heaters, the same as a gas fire would be, the same as an electric fire would be, or a radiant plaque heater. So by definition, it's actually designed to burn and heat the space in which it's installed. For the fuel poor, that's actually the most important thing, because if you can't afford to heat your whole home, you actually want to be warm in the room where you're living and spending most of your time. So that's generally, I would say, would be seen as an advantage. In a commercial setting, such as a pub, as a lover of a good pub, I'd hate to see them banned from it, but there it probably is more aesthetic than heating. If it's, and in previous life I'd worked with a few hoteliers advising them on this sort of thing. It's actually, if you install the heat source in a room where the thermostat is, any useful heat you get from that fire will displace fossil fuel or oil, gas or oil burn, if that's what the central heating system comes from. So you can't create and destroy heat or energy. So if you're burning energy and you're releasing energy into the room, provided that temperature is monitored in that room and will turn off or reduce the output from a fossil fuel burning or electric central heating source, it will displace. So I think there's a huge amount of personal opinion in that, but I personally think that it is an effective tool for providing local space heat. If I take my own personal house, I live in a building site more or less at the moment, but last winter, by having a wood burning stove on, we didn't have to, and I work at home, we don't have to have the central heating on. I don't have to burn electric fires. We put the wood burning stove on, get it warm, and it provides a gentle heat through the 3 ground floor houses, and actually that heat rises up through the house and heats the house. So my personal opinion would be, yes, it is. The house I moved from also was over 3 floors in the middle of Cheltenham, didn't have any wood burning. It had an open fire where we burnt smokeless fuel on it occasionally. It didn't provide the same warmth through the house. As I say, the heat you get out from a modern wood burning stove is very different than you would have got from an open fire or even a 10-year-old stove. In relation, does that answer the first part of your question, Councillor? In relation to what are the sales trends, about 5 years ago, the Stove Industry Alliance, in response to a question from DEFRA and BAYS actually, started to monitor the number of appliances sold by its members. We think we can account for about 80% of the market, and we think that annually we sell around about 125,000 stoves, around about, and there's some variation on that. So in 2018 there was a slight uplift on that by about 10,000 or so, and this last year through lockdown sales have actually been strong. So similarly, this year has been a good year as people haven't travelled and have worked on home improvement. But it's not the dramatic increase that people see. And I think one of the things that the Kantar report suggests, if doesn't explicitly say, is that actually a lot of those stove sales are replacing open fires or older stoves. So we don't believe that there's a huge increase in the number of fireplace settings using wood burning stoves compared to wood burning stoves and wood. So the total is remaining reasonably consistent. But yeah, total sales in the UK somewhere between 135,000 from the SIA members, and 20% more than that from non-SIA members.
Okay, thanks, James. Thanks very much. Councillor White, can I just ask a quick follow-up?
Please do, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, if it's not provocative, James Verlack, do you find attention such as this from Norwich City Council and other local authorities helpful or a nuisance to your industry?
Helpful. 100%. We're not asking for any favours. We genuinely believe that that our manufacturers produce high quality products which are part of the solution and not the cause of the problem. And I think the industry. I'm a technologist. I work on contract for the Stove Industry. I work in hydrogen, electric heating, biomass, across a range of energy vectors. I think they all have a part to play if we're going to achieve the net zero targets that we've got. And what we've got to do is to make the best of it. Where I think one of the frustrations at local authority in talking to some environmental health officers, and if any of you are environmental health officers, please correct me if I'm wrong, in talking to environmental health officers, because the Clean Air Act was operated as a criminal act, it's almost impossible, practically impossible to enforce. And I think there's been very few enforcements over the last 20 years. And I think that's a shame, because I think there's an awful lot of people who've invested a lot of their hard-earned cash in buying what they perceive to be clean products and are still being told by friends, family and the press the thing for them. And I don't think that's quite fair, because I don't think the numbers that the government are presenting are quite correct. And I think they've as much as said that there is a huge amount of uncertainty in there, and they're putting money into research to correct that. What we're trying to do as much as possible is to engage with policymakers, educate consumers, and say this is part of the solution, not the problem. No. So we welcome this engagement, and thank you for it.
Okay, well, thanks again. Thanks very much for coming. Thank you. That's my questions. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I've got a question now from Councillor Stuteley, and if I don't have any other questions after Councillor Stuteley, we'll look to wrap up this section and then move on to our next invited guest. Councillor Thomas as well has just indicated, but Councillor Stuteley.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Hi, James. Thank you for your presentation. I'm just looking at one of your members advertising the compliant Clear Skies 5 stoves, and they're offering them with a free chimney or fire pit. Is that something that you support?
I don't think I would be very foolish to comment on that. I think we have just commissioned a piece of work which we're about to present to DEFRA regarding the relative contributions of indoor burning, which, as I say, is heavily regulated and controlled and has been subject to compliance checks for the last 5 years, and outdoor burning, which is largely uncontrolled. So some of our members, retailers, do sell fire pits, chimeneas, etc. Some of them have actually developed highly efficient outdoor burners. It would be inappropriate for me to comment on those. I personally would suggest that regulation and controlling the efficiency and cleanliness of burn is the way that we should be going as a country.
Thank you, but surely fire pits defeat the object somewhat of the efficiency savings of the level 5 burners.
I think you're absolutely right that the emissions that come from an indoor eco-design or Clear Skies compliant stove, where it's useful heat, it's displacing displacing a great deal of fossil fuel use or electrical heating use has infinitely more benefit than an outside burner.
Okay, thank you. Just one final question: do your members subscribe to your group with a financial subscription?
Yes, it's a trade association run by an executive with Andy, who will be our new chair.
Thanks.
Thank you for that. Councillor Vaughan Thomas, please.
Hello. Yeah, thank you, James, for the presentation. It's very detailed. Can I ask, is there an established differential between selling homes with and without wood burners? I mean, there's a benefit. This is an add-on sales feature which would increase the value of a property or reduce it?
We've actually engaged with a number of estate agents recently and asked that very question, because what we're trying to do is to provide education that there is a difference between an open fire and a modern stove, to say that there is a difference between a stove. I have to say that the responses that came back and say it's probably not something that's determining a change in price. It might change curb appeal or the appeal to the buyer. And I think the Kantar report suggested also that there was still a strong appeal from even those people who didn't have one or didn't burn on an open fire. I think, I forget the number exactly, I think it was 48% said that they would still be happy to have one if they could afford one. So I think it's more of an appeal rather than a price differential.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Driver, indicating just in time as I was about to move on to the next bit.
Thank you. Just on that question about prices and everything, I saw lately about people having solar power on their roofs and stuff like that. When they come to sell a house, they can't sell a house because they got a contract. They had the stuff on the roof, so they don't actually own the whole property anymore. The roof is owned by some other company. You understand? Yeah, a nightmare, I would have thought. Is there any way that by having a wood burner in your house, you can actually save power to use later? Can you store it up? Is there anything in your house you can put in which will, if your heat is going all day or something, or you're burning all night or something, that you can actually save this and use the energy in another way? Is there any technology out there like that yet?
I have seen some heat stores becoming available, but they tend to work off of electric heating. So they take cheap electricity rather than heat that's in the home or from a heat pump, for example. I might be wrong. It's been a couple of years since I was involved in that particular area. There are certainly one class of stoves, slow heat release stoves. So, for example, on the continent, you might have seen these in sort of some of the older properties, large, they'll fill a corner of a room with their tiled brick things. So those, you heat those up and they provide a slow, consistent heat throughout the day to the property. And there's certainly one manufacturer I know in the UK who manufactures in Birmingham, and he produces it's called an Echo stove, and that's a modern take on those slow heat release. It's made of carbide, it weighs a ton and has the visual appeal of a modern stove, albeit a bit bigger, and provides this lovely heat through the house. They're not actually a member of the SIA, I don't believe, but certainly that's the technology that exists at the moment, as far as I know. I think it's an interesting one because I think as we move to net zero, energy will increasingly have a time value. And I think that allowing consumers, if requested by the utility, to turn their gas central heating off, I think will have a financial value to consumers.
Thank you very much for that. Well, as there are no other questions, I'd like to thank you, James, very much for your presentation today.
You're welcome.
And your answers to the questions. You're welcome to stay with us. We will make sure you're sent a copy of the minutes to this meeting, and
thank you.
when we formally ratify any recommendations we have next week, we'll send them over to you as well. You're welcome to stay in this Zoom, you're welcome to go from the Zoom and watch us on YouTube, or you're welcome to get on with your day. But but anyway, on behalf of the committee, I'd like to thank you very much to both you and Andy for being here today.
Thank you very much. I'll hang around if that's okay.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Thank you very much. Right.
Thank you.
Well, in which case, we'll now move on to Matthew White. Welcome, Mr. White. I wonder if you could, I know you'd submitted a written report to us from ahead of the last meeting. I wonder if you could perhaps set out some of your concerns and your views on this. That'd be great. And then the committee will ask some questions. Thank you very much.
Great. Hi everyone. Thanks for accepting this issue on the Scrutiny Committee. As far as I know, it's the first council in the country that's looked at this in Scrutiny, so I find that really exciting, and I know a lot of other air pollution experts are interested and closely watching, so well done. I'd like to start just with a little personal account, why I'm so interested in this myself. I have two lung diseases personally. I have asthma and one called bronchiectasis, which is a bit like cystic fibrosis. And they mean I'm extremely susceptible to chest infections, which can often be triggered by air pollution. So any air pollution event is a danger to me, and I have to be very careful of avoiding air pollution as much as I can, avoiding walking in rush hour traffic, and more and increasingly as I've learned about it, avoiding fires as well. I mean, like everyone, I love fire. When I bought my house, I really wanted to get a fire, and I was getting quotes. I was really excited about the idea. I mean, who doesn't love gazing into the flames? But I luckily learned about the air pollution aspect and realised it would be a terrible decision for me. Since then, I did a master's in climate change. It's an environmental management master's focusing on climate change, but much of it was air pollution. So I learned quite a bit there, and then I've kept track of it and keep following the what's happening in the news and everything on air pollution. And since then as well, I have noticed an increase in the amount of wood burning in my area. I live in NR3 in Norwich. So most recently, a neighbour last summer who lives just 2 doors down installed a stove, and they used it a lot throughout the winter. And I found it very difficult I couldn't have any doors or windows open when they were burning at all, because the effect it had on my chest. I felt an instant tightness and struggled to breathe. Sorry. And I know that the particulate matter, the smaller the particles, the more dangerous. As many of you probably know, smaller particles can go into the bloodstream and cause all sorts of horrible illnesses. And these machines are really like particle matter belchers, it seems to me. And particles are so small that even closing the doors and windows in these old leaky Victorian houses doesn't really help much, to be honest, because the most dangerous stuff will still be getting in, and I can still smell it in my room often. So I think it's to me it's the awareness issue. Like hardly anyone realizes, as I didn't, that it is highly polluting and often affects vulnerable people like myself, and children and the elderly are most impacted by air pollution. So I think if people aren't even aware of it, they won't consider that in, when they think about buying a wood burning stove or whatever, they won't even factor that in at all. I mean, it's largely the fault of national government, really, I think, for not really raising awareness of this, but I'd like to see local government do more as well. I'd like to talk about climate a little bit as well. Sorry, wait a second. Yeah, I think that The idea that it's carbon neutral, wood burning's carbon neutral, sustainable, is a bit of a myth and a fairy tale. It seems like it should be, but it's predicated on the idea that, you know, if you burn a tree, eventually another one will regrow and absorb all the carbon that it's produced, but that takes decades, if not more, hundreds of years. So we don't have that much time. I'm sure you know, we need to make rapid changes and rapidly reduce carbon emissions within the next 10 years. So we can't pretend that wood burning will get us out of this problem. Also, when the other issue with that is that when trees are cut down, soil is harmed, because actually soil contains about twice the amount of carbon as the trees above. So this is quite a lot that's been sequestered, and as soon as it's naked to the sun, then it starts to leach out. So it's not just the wood; it's also the soil, but also obviously the transport of the wood. I think that if the government was taking air pollution seriously, then it would probably ban wood burning stoves, especially in residential areas. This is what the all party parliamentary group on air pollution has consistently recommended, for climate and air pollution reasons. Even this week, the House of Lords defeated the government in a vote related to the Environment Bill, where there was an amendment to introduce World Health Organization air pollution limits, and that passed. So at the moment, our limits are quite high above WHO. I don't see, even if the 38% figure from the DEFRA report is exaggerated, I don't believe it's exaggerated by a great deal. And so I don't see any way of getting to these stringent air pollution limits without massively reducing the amount of wood burning, not having 100,000 plus extra wood burners installed every year. Obviously, I'm in massive favour of improvements in wood burning. I would love every open fire to become a wood burning stove, but I'd much prefer they just stopped burning solid fuel. Just have a quick check. Yeah, I've got a few slides as well. I'll quickly show, just not all of them together. If I can work out how.
We probably don't allow participants to share slides, unfortunately.
No, that's fine. Yeah. So yeah, it was just comparisons of the amount of toxic chemicals in wood smoke with the amount in cigarette smoke, and there's actually a lot more in wood smoke than there is in cigarette smoke. Certainly in secondhand cigarette smoke. Yeah, and there was also something about, I had a couple of examples of what other local authorities are doing to raise awareness of this. One is Bromley, and there's four I think London councils collaborated on a leaflet that went out to all residents to at least raise awareness of the air pollution and ask people to burn less or burn cleaner, or ideally not burn at all. I think that's probably all I've got to say.
Great. Thanks very much for that. I've got Councillor Driver who'd like to ask a question, but then we'll simply have some other members as well. So Councillor Driver, and then I think Councillor Osborne, I can see your hand up as well. So.
Yeah, thank you, Matt, for that. I lost you. You disappeared off my screen. Oh no, I've got you. Yeah, you changed the other side. You keep swapping around like a jigsaw puzzle. I can exactly understand where you come from. My wife's got really bad asthma, and she's got CPD, or what it's called, COPD. She just shouted in the air and have to sleep with a mask on, everything like that. Right. And she hates these wood burners because I don't think we realise that the particles are coming out and stuff like this. But it's just the smell. And the smell, what you can smell when you walk into a house and they got a wood burner, I just near enough kills it. I mean, we have to come out and move away. So if we, and it's the same as we went into a pub, had an open fire. I mean, I used to love going into a pub, sitting there an open fire, and well, that's a surprise, James. But sitting next to a fire used to be a really relaxing time in a bar. But but the smoke and everything there, I couldn't do that. Even now, I smoke. But my wife can get away with that a bit because I don't smoke indoors no more. It's all outdoors and stuff like that. So, but what we actually go to, I mean, I'm getting a bit old now. I mean, I used to have an open fire when I was growing up, council. They used to put coal on it. And then that got banned, and they put a gas in, and they've been banned, and they're now out. And now I've got electric, heater in there with radiators, and I mean, how long before they get banned? I was also watching a program the other day. This old woman still digging the peat up on the moors and burning peat. I'm not sure if that's any good, or not for the environment or not. That don't sound too good to me. There's a lot of smoke and coming out of peat. But are we going towards nuclear? Would we be happy with nuclear power and nuclear power stations being more acceptable? I know the disaster with all the technology and the storage, and you never get rid of the waste, and if an accident happened, that's the end of the world kind of thing. But would that be the cleanest and better for us as human beings? Would you agree with that, Matt, or not? Because I know you said about everything else.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. Personally, I'm not a fan of nuclear. I mean, it would be very low air pollution. It's true, like no air pollution. In our communities at least, which would be a bonus. But for many reasons, I'm not a fan. I think the way forward really is much more insulation, and then air source heat pumps and ground source heat pumps, and then eventually even just better designed buildings that are designed to retain heat better.
We should be taking the heat from the ground really and putting it into properties.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Osborne's next.
Thank you. Yeah, just on the issue of heat pumps, obviously it's not related to air pollution directly, but it's good to see that there will be a heat pump going in Barnard's Yard in my ward, which is so well done to the City Council for doing that. That's the way forward.
There was a slight delay on that decision being taken.
Yeah, but I think it will be happening. So yeah, well done to the City Council in doing that. Just wanted to sort of reference back to the discussion that was had when we last looked at this topic earlier in the summer. And we heard there from Professor Claire Reeves from the UEA that there is no safe level of particulate matter, and it was very clearly communicated that wood burning does damage health. I just wanted to sort of see if that's confirmed by Matt White, and also as a sort of second question, I noticed in the original report that I think you sent to the Scrutiny Committee earlier this year that there was talk about what other councils have done in terms of communication, and I wonder if you mentioned that this is the first time that Norwich, that any council is looking at it in this level of detail at a Scrutiny Committee, but I wondered if you'd be able to talk a bit about what other councils have done and what you think the City Council could do.
Yeah, I think it's mainly a comms issue. I think we need to raise awareness. The best example I saw, I forget if it was Camden or Hackney, but one of the two had a team or a few teams who would go out, and where a house was clearly burning wood or suspected of burning wood, they would just knock on the door and speak to the owners, just to face-to-face, have a face-to-face conversation about the health risk of air pollution. Others, like I said before, have done leaflets to every resident, which is brilliant, I think. And yeah, I'd like to see that. I'd like to see Norwich using all of its comms, pieces in Citizen and things. Because yeah, like I say, people don't know at all. They think it's just lovely. Wood burning is just lovely, and I used to think that as well. But now I don't.
It was interesting. I'll bring Councillor Osborne back in a second, but on the point, only today I saw in an R2 Facebook group where someone was asking about, they wanted to get a wood burner installed and where could they get it, and for various recommendations. So it's clearly still a live issue, and it probably was Camden, Matt, because I just had a quick Google on an APPG event, and they had a cabinet member for Sustainable Camden along talking about their clean air action plan that they developed. So that would sit with Camden possibly in the authority you were thinking of. Councillor Osborne.
Yeah, just as a follow-up, in terms of that communication, I mean, we may want to discuss a bit with other councillors and obviously officers about council resources in carrying that out. But in terms of that communication, there was a bit of debate last time about whether there's such a thing as clean burning, and I think the evidence from Claire Reeves suggested that there is no such thing as burning cleanly. No matter how efficient the stove, it's always going to be harmful to health, and so I wonder if your recommendation or whether your recommendation as a sort of member of someone who's affected by this, and whether someone who's looked at what other councils have done, is that the council should say to people, do not burn wood, as a clear and stark message.
Yeah, I definitely prefer that. One of the leaflets I saw that was sent out was a bit soft in my opinion, but I've heard that they are going to be increasing their strength of the message to just be say, please don't burn wood if you can avoid it. And really, there are very few houses that don't have mains, and so most people can avoid it really quite easily. So yeah.
Yeah, and I'll want to come back to that discussion about communication.
I'll bring in Councillor Galvin next, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Matt, for your presentation. I appreciate you bringing the question to scrutiny as well, because it's really good when members of the public actually approach the scrutiny committee and actually bring things forward. So thanks for doing that. I know it's your time and your effort to do that. So thanks again. I just wanted to check. You said the APPG consistently recommend a ban on stoves. Is that correct?
Yeah, so, right. Certainly in built-up areas, residential areas. Right. There's a huge difference if rural homes with very few neighbours, then they're not really affecting anyone except themselves. Similarly with pubs in urban areas, it seems. I mean, I used to love a pub with a fire, but to me it's like a country aesthetic where you're not really affecting anyone else. Very few compared.
Okay, and they're recommending that ban due to the health issues then? Yeah.
I mean, they do recognise the climate impact as well, but yeah, predominantly it's about health and particulate matter.
So in terms of the council's responsibility, although obviously we're not in charge of every citizen in Norwich, following on from that, do you think it's a responsibility of the council to let people know about that? Is that essentially the role you think
absolutely,
you play, or do you have other ideas?
Yeah, and I don't know what interactions or influence the council might have over the NHS, but that's an issue I think is really lacking there, because when you go to the doctors and if you've got a bad chest or whatever, they'll always ask if you smoke, but they never ask if you live with a wood burner or even if you sit with your engine idling in your car all the time. And there'd be lots of literature on the wall. Like obviously I go to the respiratory department in the hospital a lot. There's so much about smoking and nothing about anything else. So yeah, I don't know if the clinical commissioning group or something could be utilised.
Okay, that's something we can consider, I guess. Thank you. That's it.
I mean, on the emissions thing, this is an issue that has come up before, and will no doubt come up in the future. But buses in and around Castlemaine are supposed to switch off their engines when they're sat stationary, and my experience of being in that area is that buses don't do this, and all of this leads to a sort of cumulative effect on overall air quality. So I think, yes, there are, and as a part of this scrutiny, we will come up with some recommendations that relate to people burning stuff, but there are other levers that I think the council can use to reduce emissions elsewhere in the city. Councillor Osborne, you are next.
Yeah, just as a sort of follow up to that, and obviously there's sort of cumulative effects of air pollution, and this was something that was discussed with Claire Reeves last time about the ways that particulate matter from wood burners may combine with other particulates and form more deadly compounds as well. But I just wanted to ask Matt White about the sort of localized effects. I mean, you mentioned that your neighbours 2 doors down have a wood burner, and I've heard also stories about people not being able to go into pubs, and I think Keith, you mentioned that as well, Councillor Driver. And so presumably part of the problem is this is that where there is wood burning, it can be a very localized effect, and that can really disadvantage certain people, such as yourself, who you may or may not be able to afford to move away, but if your neighbour puts in a wood burner a couple of doors down, there's not much you can do about that. And so just to sort of, I guess that's something that where the council does need to provide that communication to try and address this as a citywide issue, because it does impact people and impact people's quality of life.
Yeah, I think it's because it can be so localized. I don't think these emissions often show up at all on the council's monitoring stations, because they only have 2 or 3 proper ones, I think, permanent ones. And so it could be completely ignored. Like if I had an air pollution monitor on the side of my house that faced the wood burner, then it would tell a very different story from the one on Castlemaine, for instance.
Yeah, so I guess the point is that it may not look like a problem, but it can be a real problem especially for people, I guess, like yourself who have.
Yeah. I remember a couple of times last year that there was a temperature inversion and all of the smoke was just trapped, and I walked to the heath and it was, I mean, I should have stayed in the house, but I didn't realise out how bad it was, and it was a real struggle to breathe that day. So yeah, it just builds up sometimes.
Yeah, just to echo what Lucy said, thank you for your time and your contribution.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Matt, please? No? Okay, well, thanks very much for your contribution, Matt, and for bringing this item for us so that we're looking at it today. What we'll do now is we'll move on to the sort of final stage as far as we're concerned, which is to talk about everything that we've heard both at our meeting back in July, and we've heard from the various participants today, and we'll try and come up with some recommendations. So discussion and potential recommendations. So I open the floor to whoever puts their hand up first. Councillor Giles got there first, and then Councillor Osborne.
Thanks, Chair. It's a quick question for Graham. I wondered what happened regarding the article that was supposed to be in Citizen regarding wood burning stoves, and whether that will be in the winter edition. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Certainly, we indicated last time at the previous scrutiny that we were intending to do some awareness raising about the new regulations that had come in, limiting particularly around the fuel sources that were able to be burnt, and we've been in contact with Norfolk County Council's trading standards, and we're working on the content of that article. The plan is to get that in the winter edition of Citizen magazine. So
Thanks,
So
Graham.
it's still planned.
Thank you for that. Councillor Osborne.
Yeah, just on that point of communications, I think that's something that's come across quite clearly, is that then, you know, there's scope for the council to do that kind of communications, whether it's in Citizen or a specific leaflet going out to either citywide or to targeted areas. I mean, the sort of Golden Triangle area was one that was raised, where there's, you know, it's a fashionable thing for those Golden Triangle people. But just on that point of communications, I wonder if there's whether there's scope to actually work with behaviour change experts on the most appropriate messaging, and also, you know, appreciate the work that Matt has done on this, and as a resident, I wonder whether there's scope to engage that Matt White as a resident, who's obviously brought this to the attention of the committee, and whether the comms team can communicate with him about it. Sorry, I feel funny talking about Matt White in front of him, but yeah.
I mean, there's, you know, it's interesting actually. There's been a lot of lots of the discussions we have been having come back to this issue of comms and how we get across the messaging. And you know, when we were hearing from the SAA, you know, the sort of agreement that an annual MOT for my term MOT for wood burners would be a good thing, or you know, a twice yearly sweep and that kind of thing. So actually packaging all of this up and getting across to residents that it isn't just simply a case of buy the stove, set and forget, and burn some stuff in it, but you need to be you know, at the very least a responsible owner, and help people understand in particular why things like fire pits seem to be, and I'm no expert on this, but seem to be significantly worse than well-maintained indoor burners. Councillor Driver and then Councillor Osborne.
Yeah, I didn't want to get down the road that we start recommending that we don't have fire burners in our houses, or, you know, fire stalls in the houses. I mean, you heard from one other expert today, James is still here sitting in there listening to all this, that he disagrees with the DEFRA readings and what was said at your last meeting. And well, you got your eyebrows up and down again, Jamie, but I don't believe everything you told me every time when you're in your mouth at City Council. I mean, and do I say yes, you're the expert? And, or, you know, we've got two people here, one who's saying one thing and one is saying another. Now, I can understand Matt White's problem completely, because my wife was exactly the same, and everything like this. But do we just go down this road? And I mean, how do we just follow it up? I mean, do we tell the citizens of Norwich, this is bad, this is bad? I mean, we can tell everything is bad. I mean, I spoke. That's got to be one of the worst things for you in the whole wide world. I mean, the City Council told me that's bad. I mean, I was a planning committee today. I got told that was bad. You know, so, but there's a lot of things bad for you. I mean, it's like cars. I mean, people have diesel cars. Everyone told us to get diesel cars, and now you've got to have purple ones, and now you've got to have electric ones. I mean, sooner or later, someone's going to come up and say, well, electric cars ain't no good for you. You know, so how far are we going to go? I mean, we haven't heard from any of the environment people from City Hall on here yet. I don't know if they're going to say anything or not. But my brother actually bought one of these fire things, stools, last year. So my wife hadn't been round and seen him. So, because that affected her. So that's probably why he bought it. But that's beside the point. But he reckoned it's working really good. And he went and saved him money. The heat is good. There ain't a smell coming off it, but I can smell it when I go in there. So, but how far do we make recommendations here at Scrutiny? I mean, we're not experts, and we heard from two different experts today, or two people who are in the field, one way and one the other. I mean, are we just saying, well, we're all against climate change and air pollution is getting bad because we've been told, and go that way? There's a lot of hands went up. I'll stop there.
I was about to speak and I realised I'd been muted. Thank you, Councillor Driver. We at our previous meeting we did hear from other experts on this, but I've had a number of hands up. I will go straight to the senior officer here, Graham Nelson, whose hand is up. So we'll bring in Graham first in case it's in response to points already made. Graham.
Thank you. It was a specific point in relation to some of the sort of questions Councillor Driver made, and I'm just hoping if this helps you sort of steer the debate that we've got. The City Council clearly has statutory responsibilities with air quality. We've got Leslie on the call, who's one of the environmental health officers, who's far more expert in matters of air quality than I am. But just to put it in general context, we've got a number of roles, responsibilities with regards to air quality. Certainly we've got an ability, and you've got an ability as sort of elected members to, position the council. We can lobby, we can ask, as I think the speakers have generally recognised today. The issue is that there's the national regulatory framework is moving in a certain direction. You might not be particularly happy with the way that is moving, particularly the way that the powers about smoke control areas work, because as the speaker from the industry is noting, effectively the purpose of smoke control area is effectively, as they were originally designed around banning the burning. Effectively now they are not. So if you introduce or spread smoke control areas, that will have the effect of giving a power that enables the local authority to effectively, in theory at least, drive burning from one form to potentially another in terms of the quality of appliances and open fires. But what it doesn't do is give you a regulatory power to stop burning of solid fuels at all within the area. Of course, if you plan a comms message within the area, you can design that around where you want to position the authority. It doesn't necessarily have to be designed to support that regulatory framework. You could try and encourage people's better nature and get them to, sort of start your comms message with, all burnt. There is no safe level of exposure to particulate matter. All forms of burning produce particulate matter, and then you move on from there in the same way that you might do with a lot of other activities that people are entitled to do legally that might not be great for their health. But if you are doing this particular activity, do it in a particular way. That feels to me like the nature of a comms message that you might want to put out. I guess there'll be a process that we need to go through to sign up to that particular comms message, and but I'm no expert in that, but we can look at that. The point I will get to is at some point we've got certain routes at our disposal that we can use Citizen Magazine, and that gets to everybody, or quite a high proportion of our residents, one way. We can also use our website. Doing something further than that comes with a particular budget implication within it that we would need to consider as part of that. And just my reflection on this is it's a fascinating debate, and I've learned a lot of what you've got, but I'm still slightly concerned over the evidence that we've heard today. And I think a point that Mr. White made in terms of introducing this is actually air quality varies a great deal in local areas depending on local circumstances, particularly when it comes to particulate matter. And we've got 2 air quality recording stations in the city effectively on a permanent basis. And I think from an officer perspective, I'm not sure that we've got sufficient evidential basis about where the local air quality is in order to drive action or determine whether you are best off doing further action, for instance, in relation to control of traffic, or for instance, targeting wood burning where that sits. So I think that's probably what I wanted to say, just to sort of leave you with a few things about where we may be heading. But if we're after justifying things that might cost quite a degree of money in terms of, door-to-door contact, physical, getting people out on the ground to do that, I'm a bit worried that we haven't got the evidence available to justify that, as opposed to other things. And one of the first things we may need to correct, if there is a member appetite to do that, is some of that local statistical information about precise air qualities, particularly around areas where there's sensitive and health vulnerable people. So, intuitively, areas around primary schools, what is local air quality around different primary schools? What are the causes of where those vulnerable people may actually be? So questions like that, I would encourage you to reflect on in your recommendations.
Thank you very much, Graham. I'm going to bring in Councillor Osborne next, then Councillor Galvin.
Thanks, thanks, James. Yeah, just to pick up on what Councillor Driver said. First of all, I'm a bit surprised that you say that you don't always believe everything I say. But yeah, that aside, just on how far do we go? I mean, the evidence, and Keith, you weren't there at the previous discussion, but James referred to it earlier. The evidence from the sort of independent, as it were, expert on air quality from the UEA, Claire Reeves, was that wood burning is bad for health. And Keith, you raised the example of smoking. I mean, everyone knows that smoking is bad, and the advice given is do not smoke. Obviously, if people want to smoke, they can do so, but there is obviously restrictions in public places. As Graham's outlined, there's a limit to what we can do, and I think a lot of this does focus on communications in terms of what the council can do. But so far as I think the evidence shows, wood burning is bad, and it is particularly bad in localized effects. And so I think in terms of the communications, it's worth saying that and making that very clear. And there is not a safe way of burning wood. There's not a clean way of burning wood. Just picking up on what Graham said about the localized effects and needing to look at that. Yeah, that's obviously an issue. I wonder whether there's scope for partnership working with the council, and obviously this will sort of depend on officer capacity, but whether the council can work with the UEA to do some studies on this, or to do some targeted communications, whether they can work with the CCG. One of the things that Matt White raised was going to the respiratory clinic, not seeing any information about wood burning, or not being asked about wood burning when you go to the doctor with a lung condition. Whether there's something that the council can do with the CCG, or ask the county council health overview scrutiny committee to look at, or whether there's things that we can do with schools. So I think that that might answer some of the question, the problems raised about localized effects and about council capacity.
I mean, it's interesting, before I bring in Graham again, it's interesting to you talk, Councillor Osborne, you just mentioned a bit about, we've talked about smoking, and we know that smoking is harmful, but yet people do it. I mean, there was earlier in the year, there was a study from the University of Oxford that said there is no safe level of alcohol consumption, but yet we're not, as a council, recommending that Councillor Stuteley goes with his role as chair of licensing and suggests all the pubs are closed. So I think it's about what is a proportionate response to the clear evidence from academia, which is there is no safe level of particulate matter, versus that people have wood burning stoves, and how can they continue to use them in a way that does the minimal amount of harm whilst exercising their legal right to maintain one of these stoves. And that's the sort of position I think we ought to be in. But I'll bring in Graham and then Councillor Galvin after that.
Thank you. I was just going to offer a quick comment, just in direct response to Councillor Osborne's comments about particularly particularly the CCG. I think from a local council point of view, we've got that statutory responsibility and we've got a certain level of technical capability around the issue of air quality in relation to what that does to, if you like, general public health. At the level of the CCG, I feel really uncomfortable about starting to try and instruct them about what the relative impacts might be on individuals' health. But it does strike me that if we're thinking through some approach to communications that we're rolling out, it might be sensible, it probably would be sensible to have various contacts with local health partners just to see if they wish to participate in that, particularly if they wish to roll that out. It's probably a matter that it might be worth thinking through, so clearly any comms that we ought to do around particularly the issue of wood ought to be done in close concert with the county council, who have the responsibility for trading standards. So where you can get the right supply of wood, that needs to be brought up. Any comms things, we would need to take care to line up with a few other partners. So that will probably take a little bit of time to sort. But as I say, I'm slightly reluctant about moving the city council into a position of giving people advice about their own health, which feels to me that's for other public agencies to better do.
Thank you. Councillor Galvin, please.
Thanks. Yeah, just a few things in response to everyone that's spoken, really different things. I think we do have a responsibility to stick to the facts here. So, and we heard from Claire Reeves, who's an emeritus professor in an atmospheric scientist, also an advisor to the government. And we've heard facts from DEFRA and the APPG that are sourced with facts. And then the other side of that, we've heard from an industry which is reliant on selling stoves. So I think we need to sort of carefully just consider that. I'm sure I don't need to spell that out to you. But we need to stick to the facts, and otherwise there's no point us being here really. And we can't stop anything happening, obviously, but we can advise. There's a difference with alcohol, obviously, because you choose if you drink or not. This is air pollution, so it actually affects other people. So that's the issue there. And smoking is a real problem for us as a city. If you look at Marmot, these are things that the council has looked at. In my time as a councillor, certainly we have looked at these things, we've taken a view on them, and we've tried to work with other councils to influence them. So again, I think the fact this is accepted for our scrutiny here today means that we do need to make some recommendations that actually have an effect on this. So I think that all boils down to the fact that we do need to tell people the truth and give them information, and we do as a council have ways to do that, which are relatively straightforward if we get it right. I don't think we need to overcomplicate it, but we need to get some information out there about the effect of wood burning on both the climate and on people's health. And it would be a bit of an abdication of our responsibility, knowing what we do, if we choose to ignore that. Just looking at how smoking got banned in public places, people were worried about doing it. It was done, it went through, it was accepted, it's had a good effect. So I think, we can take the evidence that's factual evidence and we can do something about it. And that's what I hope the point of this scrutiny will be, and that we can look at the facts. Thanks.
It is worth, I absolutely take on board the point you made about offering a critical mind when it comes to where our sources of evidence are. You should, however, understand that APPGs are not official bodies, and many APPGs are funded by the industry that they act. So we do have to be, I'm not saying that the APPG on air quality is one of those, but many APPGs are funded and are used as lobbying vehicles within Parliament. So because an APPG says X, we should not take that as sacrosanct, and that should be given a critical view in the same way we would give critical views of other information that we've been party to. That said, I think it would be quite useful to offer a copy of our findings and our recommendations to Garen Davis, the chair of the APPG. Councillor Osborne and then Councillor Carlo, please.
I think Councillor Carlo probably had her hand up before me.
Sorry, I saw your big yellow hand rather than Councillor Carlo.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm keen when putting forward a message to the public that we put it forward in the context of climate change also, to make the point that we need to move to net zero as soon as possible, as quickly as possible, that we need to move to using electricity from renewable sources and green hydrogen, and that having stepping stones on the way actually can complicate the picture. So the idea of having wood-burning stoves as part of a stepping stone, I think that complicates the picture for people. I think the sort of simple issue is that we mustn't go on burning whatever fuel it is, and that includes wood. Because I think people at the moment do have the view that burning wood is a green thing to do, but actually it isn't. It obviously has a carbon impact, has an air quality impact, and to make the point that actually when we transition 100% to electricity from renewable sources and green hydrogen, then actually the pollution problem will be very much reduced. Obviously, it will come from other sources, for example, abrasion of tyres on roads or whatever. But so it's going to have a number of benefits, and so to sort of wrap it up in that bigger picture would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carlo. Councillor Osborne and Councillor Stutely, please.
Thank you. Yeah, just to follow up on what Councillor Carlo was saying, I sort of said it again, that there is no safe and there is no clean way of burning anything but burning wood. And I think there is value in communicating that, because wood burning is not known to be, it's not generally known to be something that's harmful. And that is where I think the council can play a role is in communicating that and making that clear. Because we talked about smoking and drinking. People know that smoking is bad. People know that drinking in excess is bad for your health, but people often do not know about the bad effects of wood burning. And so I think there is scope in it for doing a clear communications work on that, whether that's in Citizen or however that may be done. Just to pick up on the point about that Graham referred to about the CCG, I'm not intending the council to instruct the CCG to do anything. It's more about just communicating with them, and in the same way that the council works with them on fuel poverty or cold homes or health, fitness and healthy eating. That can be something that the council can work with the CCG on or ask them about. I sort of want to move on away from the topic of communication slightly, but onto license trade, and wonder if Ian might want to talk about this as well, or see what the council can do in terms of communicating with licensed premises. Obviously, I know that we can't legislate or regulate anything, but whether we can communicate with licensed premises, because they are places which often have pubs where people aren't aware of the dangers and where staff are exposed to open fires and wood smoke for quite a long time if they're working there.
Okay, well that neatly brings Councillor Stutely in, whose hand was up next. So, Councillor Stutely.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to respond to Councillor Osborne's point there, I think, and generally, actually, it sounds like the committee is moving towards an educational recommendation to educate the public rather than to try and legislate or create new zones to ban wood burning. But I think there is some merit in having people transition from open fires and old inefficient burners to the new burners as an interim measure. But while we're educating the public, I think some of the inquiries that I get from members of the public are what are the benefits of various renewable investments that they can make. I've had people asking about the heat source pumps and solar panels, and Norwich City Council run a scheme annually for installation of solar panels. So a comparison of the relative benefits of various investments in green energy production may be a good way to go, so that people can make informed choices about what will be considerable investments that they have to make if you're investing in a new system from scratch. It sounds like it's going to be a couple of £1,000. You can get solar panels for about £3,000 upwards. So people need to have those informed choices presented to them. I think that would be handy in any communication we present.
Thank you. Apologies.
Apologies. Can I just talk about the industry as the license industry as well, because a lot of places have open fires, and I would also like to encourage those venues to upgrade. And I think upgrading from an open fire to making the investment into one of the new wood burning systems will still have the aesthetic effect, but also might make a considerable contribution to benefiting people's health, especially staff.
Thank you, Councillor Stuteley. Apologies to Councillors Galvin and Osborne. I didn't see which yellow hand went up first. So
go for Lucy, because I've spoken already. So go for Lucy.
Okay, Councillor Galvin, please.
Thank you. I'll be quick. I just think I'm not sure of the benefit of having a transitioning approach when stoves are so expensive and not much better. I think it's perhaps bad advice for a council to be giving to if something's bad for you, it's bad for you. And sort of putting a middle expensive stage in of something that's a bit less bad for you is probably not really the best advice I've ever heard given. So yeah, aesthetic or not, it might be it's not going to help people's chests either. So it's quite we heard about it's what sounds like it's at least £3,000 really, and then a maintenance ongoing, and you'd expect it to be there for at least 10 years. So it seems like a hefty price tag for something that's transitioning. So yeah, but I do think it would be good to move towards some clear recommendations around a comms campaign and how that would work now, if that's possible.
Yeah, I think absolutely with comms, although accepting the fact that we need to set the fact that there should be, from a strategic point of view, there should be some comms rather than using the rest of this meeting to go through the minutiae of what that comms messaging might look like. Councillor Osborne and then Councillor Stuteley, please.
Yeah, I was just going to say something very similar actually to what Councillor Galvin said about the transitioning. The end, as Councillor Carlo said earlier, if we're aiming for the city to be carbon neutral very soon, then I think we need to. I don't think it's necessarily helpful to focus on transition things, and also we'll need to dispel that myth that wood burning is carbon neutral or is good for the environment, which is quite a commonplace myth, and I think the council has a role to dispel that. The other thing I was going to say is that I think something else that the council can do is look at solid fuel burning in council properties. So as we highlighted in the previous scrutiny meeting on this, there are, I think it's something like 60 or 70 council properties where the main source of heating is solid fuel, and that's obviously not great for either fuel poverty or health. And so if we can look at those properties, I'm sure that the Richards team are already looking at that. And the other thing is looking at burning, sort of enforcement against burning of bonfires and wet leaves and things on council land in council estates. Because certainly my experience is that can be reported as antisocial behaviour, but it doesn't necessarily get enforced against. And so that maybe that's something that the council can look at.
Thank you. Councillor Stuteley.
Yeah, thank you. Just for clarification, I wasn't suggesting that we encourage a transitional period or a transitional approach. My suggestion was to present the facts to people where I think people who are looking for green technologies for their homes are more likely to invest in cleaner solutions, such as solar panels if they don't already have them. Or other methods of heating. I certainly wouldn't encourage the transition, but some people will want to have this for aesthetic purposes, and I would much rather them buy one of the new systems rather than stick with an old one or even install an old one.
Thank you for that. Councillor Galvin.
Thanks for that clarification, Ian. I get that. Yeah, because the eco design stoves produce six times as much particulate matter as a new large truck, basically. So that's the eco ones. So, and that's Air Quality Expert Group information from 2017. I mean, our friends at the Stove Association might dispute that, but that is air quality facts. Obviously we can argue about the numbers a bit, but I think we can safely say that the facts, as we've said, are that these things do chuck out stuff that's really bad for your health, and there isn't a safe lower limit. So yeah, I think perhaps that's the basis of our message, and totally agree that we don't need to do that work in here. We just need to recommend it is done and set up a group that does it, and perhaps ask them to come back to us. And it would be great to offer to help them, or to have, you know, to get input into them, so that we don't lump this onto someone that hasn't perhaps got the mandate to really go ahead with it as far as it needs, because it needs to be done quite strongly, I think. And it's obviously a bit of behaviour change, a bit of information needs to go forward that people will need support with. So I'd like to recommend that we ask for a communication strategy around it from the comms team, who are very good and I'm sure can come up with something.
Well, you'll be pleased to know, Councillor Galvin, that on the 5 recommendations I'm about to read out that have been captured from the various things that have been said. So the first one contains both the word communication and strategy. So Councillor Osborne, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to ask about sort of reporting back on this. Obviously, we'll wait to see what the recommendations are that you've got, but just to know how we and also the members of the public will, or especially, I guess, Matt White, who's obviously asked this, will be sort of informed of the progress of this.
Okay, well, so the recommendations, and just just by way of a reminder, these are not formal recommendations we're making today, because this is a virtual meeting, but the recommendations that will be before you to agree next Thursday are currently: 1, to prepare a communication strategy to residents focusing on the facts; 2, submit our findings to Geraint Davis, Chair of the APPG, on air quality; 3, work with the CCG in the health message they promote with regard to respiratory problems; 4, investigate Norwich City Council solid fuel burning in council properties; and 5, enforcement of burning of wet leaves on bonfires on council properties. So that's what I currently have. Councillor Osborne.
I just had one more, and potentially contact the UEA about support on that, because they may be able to do studies on it, or you know, yeah, they may also be able to help.
So which aspect might the UEA?
On the communication, or studying the localized effects of wood burning.
Okay, well, I think if we just leave the communication as communication strategy, focusing on the facts, and then we can, deal with who we're going to allow the comms team effectively to work on that. I saw Councillor Giles; he's moved around the screen, but Councillor Giles.
Yes, sorry, I wasn't sure if you wanted my virtual hand up or physical. Yeah, no, I was going to suggest a recommendation. I know we haven't discussed it today, but I know we discussed it in July regarding writing to MPs about the resources available to the Health and Safety Executive to support employees in licensed premises who are working with amongst appliances that don't meet the new legal standards, because at the moment the HSE has been cut in half resources wise the last 11 years and doesn't have the capacity to support employees.
For the benefit of anyone watching this on YouTube, there's lots of nods on my gallery view on Zoom to support that recommendation. So yeah, we'll get that included in. These will all be typed up for when they come next week. I'm going to bring in Graham Nelson first, and then I'll bring in Councillor.
Just on the last point, can I bring in Leslie Oldfield just on that point about the HSE? Because I've caught up with her earlier in the week, and she was telling me things were slightly different to what we may have been led to believe in relation to that. So just before you agree that recommendation about the role of the HSE, I wonder if Leslie can just update us about what their role is in relation, this was particularly in relation to enforcement and licensed premises.
Yes, the enforcement is with the local authority. So our food and safety team would actually be the enforcers for any health and safety to do in licensed premises.
I understand that, but I'm talking about from the perspective of the employees working in those premises, and I understand the HSE doesn't fulfil that function, hasn't done, but I believe it should do so.
I mean, the wording could be writing to MPs about resources that are available to support employees working in licensed premises who have wood burners. So keeping it relatively fluid as to which organisation. How about that? That sort of covers a multitude of sins.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Stutley.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm not sure if you covered this in your list because my sound went slightly when you were reading it out. But I'd be very interested to see any studies that we can commission or encourage over the winter period to see how localised the effects of wood burners are. Obviously, it would have to be a study carried out over a period of time through the winter, but if we were to identify certain areas of Norwich and actually get some real data, I think it would be useful to us and to the industry and health experts as well.
And that may be something that could involve a tie-up with the UEA to assist with that process potentially. Okay, yeah, we can. How do people feel about that as a recommendation? Yeah.
That's something that could be done with UEA, yeah.
Yeah, getting some nods and thumbs up. So yeah, well, as I say, these will all come back in written form next week for us to agree formally, particularly if there are any audio issues with hearing some of them. At this stage, does anyone else have anything they'd like to say? Councillor Driver and then Councillor Carlo, please.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Wright. As you know, I just went on to Scrutiny and I was going to come to this meeting as a substitute, but actually joined the committee full time. I didn't realise that you had another meeting next Thursday, and I'm not here next Thursday. So I must apologise, but I might keep your arguments down a bit.
Right, thank you very much for your input today. You will be a welcome addition to our committee, Councillor Driver. Councillor Carlo.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, is it within the City Council's powers to discourage bonfires, outdoor bonfires across the whole of the city, please? It is a problem across the whole city, and it seems that a bit unfair just to single out the council areas where the council obviously has got stronger powers, but it's a general problem, and I think taking action against repeat offenders is leaving it too late. We really need to discourage outdoor bonfires altogether and encourage people to use the brown bin. Some people's very large gardens will exceed the brown bins, but there is composting actually in people's gardens as an option. So I don't know if that would be possible, please. Thank you.
Can I bring in either Graham or Leslie? Graham had his yellow hand up.
Well, I did, but let Leslie speak. She's far more expert on the matter than I am.
No, all I would say is that I think it's something that could also be included in the Citizen magazine. And I know that the winter edition does have to be put together fairly quickly. I think within the next couple of weeks. How much space there is still left still needs to be, I still need to find out. But I did want to get something about wood burners in. But something about we could also include responsible behaviour with regards bonfires as well.
So a message around any form of burning, really.
The short answer to Councillor Carlo's question about though is whether we have the power to ban bonfires for people on their own private land is we don't. So whereas we have, and I think the point of your recommendation is we have other policies and ways of controlling things on our own land, and which could be looked at given resources and time in terms of taking that forward. I know from some personal experience that we've got policies around burning on allotments, for instance, but that's not necessarily a quick win to do. Clearly there's a lot going on in the council at the moment, and we need to take a proportionate approach to looking at that, but I'm sure it could be looked at over time if there was a political will for that to be done.
Fireworks displays, builds on them.
Thank you. Louise.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I was just conscious of time and wondered if we'd perhaps got to a set of recommendations that the committee were happy with.
I think we sort of reached the natural end point there. So yes, we'll wrap it up for today. The recommendations will come back when we'll all, with the exception of Councillor Driver, be meeting face to face in the council chamber, and next Thursday, and we'll just go through a formal process of ratifying these before we then get on to the important issue of our work programme. So thanks very much to everyone for your input this evening. Thanks very much to Matt, who's still with us, and members from the SAA. And great, thank you very much for a good piece of scrutiny. Thank you. Good night.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks.